Throughout human history, there are several wonderful tales about God, angels, giants, and disasters. If you look closely, however, you'll see that they portray a side of the human past that is often forgotten. The First Book of Enoch, also called the Ethiopic Book of Enoch, is a pseudepigraphical work that is not in any canon of Scripture and whose only complete version is an Ethiopic translation of a Greek version made in Palestine from the original Hebrew or Aramaic. Hello friends, welcome back to our channel. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on the amazing mysteries of science. In the book of Genesis, Enoch is the seventh patriarch. During the Hellenistic period of Judaism, there was a lot of apocryphal writing about him, 3rd century BC to 3rd century AD. At first, he was only respected for how religious he was, but later, people thought that God had given him special information. This picture of Enoch as a prophet was influenced by a Babylonian story about a seventh ancient king, Enmenduranna, who was connected to the sun god and got messages from God. Many of these parts of the Babylonian myth can be found in the story of Enoch. Most of the pieces that make up Enoch are about the end of the world. Well, Genesis 6, 1-4 is not easy to understand, and when we try to figure out what it means, we should be humble because this text has been interpreted in different ways, and I don't think we should be divisive with other Christians in the church or among the people of God no matter what we think it means. Genesis 6 says that the sons of God saw the daughters of people and chose the daughters of people to be their wives, so they got married. So the question is, who are the sons of God who are marrying the daughters of men? Well, there are three ways to look at it. One is that sons of God refers to the godly descendants of Seth. Cain killed Abel, so Adam and Eve got together and had Seth. Seth kept Abel's godly faith going after Abel's death. So one idea is that the sons of God are the people who come from Seth's children who married the daughters of humans. This is the line of Cain, who was not good. The second way to look at the phrase sons of God is that it means angels who marry humans. The third idea is that the sons of God are heroic tyrant kings from mythical times. We know about the ancient Near East through stories. For instance, there are stories about a man named Gilgamesh who was part god and part human and did many great things. So how do we figure out what the right meaning is? Sons of God is a phrase that is only used 4 or 5 times in the Hebrew Bible. Only one time does this happen in Genesis 6. There are 2 of these at the beginning of the book of Job. At the beginning of the book of Job, we see God meeting with the angels in his heavenly court, which is also called his heavenly assembly. Angels there are called sons of God. In another part of the book of Job, chapter 38, God challenges Job by asking, "Where were you when I made the world?" When he made the world, the sons of God were so happy that they sang. So it seems to be true, and there also seems to be a clear reference to angels. The last time is in the book of Daniel, which is written in Aramaic. When the king looked into the furnace, he saw four people there. It says that one of them looked like a son of God, which means it was a god or an angel. Only 5 times in the Bible do we see the exact phrase son of God or sons of God, and each time it refers to an angelic being. This use is different from other places. In other parts of the Bible, it says that the relationship between a person and God is like that of a father and a son. So Adam and God are like father and son. When God makes a deal with David, it's like God and David are father and son. But it doesn't say that, and it also doesn't say that Adam is God's son. It doesn't say that David is the son of God, and it doesn't use that phrase. So every time this phrase is used in the Bible, it is always and very clearly talking about angels. We also have the message of the New Testament as a witness. So this is talked about in 2 places in the New Testament. One is 2 Peter 2, and the other is the book of Jude. Both of these texts are related to each other very closely. In the 2nd chapter of 2 Peter, Peter talks about how hard times are coming for Christians and how there will be people who deny the faith, the truth about Jesus Christ and his work, and the gospel. There will be false teachers, and they will bring corruption and destruction into the church. Peter points to the Old Testament and says, well, if God could save his faithful people in hard times in the Old Testament, then he will be able to do the same thing in the New Testament. Peter says that the Old Testament shows this in 2 ways. One is about Noah in Genesis 6, and the other is about how Lot was saved from the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And the use of the word "and" in the Greek text of 2 Peter makes it clear that there are only 2 examples, not 3. So if God didn't spare the angels who sinned, but saved Noah, and if he didn't spare Sodom and Gomorrah, but saved Lot, then it's clear that God doesn't care about sin. So there are two examples connected by the word and each example has two parts, a negative part and a positive part. There's a bad part and a good part. So when Peter talks about the angels who sinned, it's clear that he's referring to Genesis 6, because this is related to the story of Noah. Some people say, no, he's not talking about Genesis 6, but that's not true. So my question to them is, if Peter is trying to encourage his readers with well-known Old Testament stories, and if the story of the angels who sinned is not in Genesis 6, where is it? It couldn't be talking about any other story in the Old Testament. Some people think it's about the fall of Satan, but there's no story in the Old Testament about that. Peter is referring to Genesis 6 in a very clear way. Jude does the same thing, and it's clear in his book because he talks about false teachers and people who will deny the faith. He also refers to the Old Testament to show how God has saved his people in the past and will do so in the future. He also talks about two things. He is talking about angels who left their rightful place to live, their rightful home. He also talks about the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and says that they were just like these cities because they did strange things that were not right. Well, in the Greek text, they mean angels, and these mean Sodom and Gomorrah. So the story of Genesis 6 and the story of Sodom and Gomorrah have the same thing in common: strange sexual behavior. If God can save his people from even the weirdest sins, then he will save the people who are listening to Peter and the people who are listening to Jude. He will take care of us. Now, someone might say to me, well, Jesus says in the Gospels that angels in heaven don't marry or get married, so the angel can't have sexual relationships with human women. Well, they aren't reading the Gospels correctly, because Jesus says that when he comes back at the end of time, he won't be able to marry because we'll be like the angels in heaven. Notice that he says the angels in heaven, and Jude says that they moved from where they should have been living. So Jesus and Jude don't go against each other. Angels don't get married in heaven. In Jude, they left their rightful place to live and went to do strange things that were wrong, so that no one is confused. So it seems pretty clear that Genesis 6 tells us that these are angels who are marrying humans, and that Jude and Peter agree with this. Who are the Nephilim? Is the next question. Genesis 6:4 says that the Nephilim lived on earth at that time and afterward when the sons of God had sexual relationships with human women and had children with them. They were heroes from a long time ago who were well known. There are two main ideas there. First, one says that the Nephilim lived on earth back then and also after that. There are two ways to look at this phrase. It could mean that they were on earth at that time and after that. What does it mean that they were back then and after that? Well, some people think this means that the Nephilim were the children of the angels who married the women in Genesis 6, 1-3. They say that the Nephilim were the result of these unnatural marriages, and they point to texts from the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, called Enochic traditions, in which the Nephilim are seen as giants. There's another possible way to look at it. When it says that the Nephilim were there in those days and also afterward, it could mean that they were there before the angels had sex with women, and that they were also there after they did. So it could mean that the Nephilim had nothing to do with the angels marrying humans. I think that's the right way to understand it for two main reasons. First, I looked at every time this phrase was used, and also after that. I looked up every time this phrase was used in the Hebrew Bible and looked at how it was used. And the second meaning fits the way this word is used best. So when the Bible says they were there in those days and also afterward, it means that the Nephilim were there before and after angels lived with the humans. This is the right way to understand it for another reason. In the last sentence, it says that they were famous heroes from long ago. This sentence doesn't start with the word "and." Now, that's a very big deal. In the Hebrew Bible, almost every sentence starts with "and." There are two reasons why a sentence doesn't start with "and." It could be the start of a new section, or it could be a comment on the last sentence, which is what we call a footnote. This sentence doesn't start a new section. Instead, it's a footnote to the sentence before it. So the last sentence means that the Nephilim were around before angels and humans lived together, and they were also around after. And it says briefly that they were the heroes of the past. In this case, Moses is taking the Nephilim out of the realm of myth. One thing to keep in mind is that the Bible doesn't tell us who the Nephilim were. What's the meaning of that? How come the text doesn't tell us who they were? Because the first people who read this text knew them well. The first people who read this text already knew who the Nephilim were, so they didn't need to be told. And all that Moses is saying, Look, whoever you think these ancient heroes like Gilgamesh are, you've read about them in ancient mythologies. No matter who they were, they have nothing to do with this story. They don't come from angels and people living together, and I think that's the right way to understand it. But the difficulty is that this is a tough passage to understand, and it has not always been done correctly over the decades. And they arrived at an inaccurate interpretation in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC. They believed that the Nephilim were giants created by angels cohabiting with humans, and this was recorded in the Book of Enoch. In his letters to Timothy, Paul advises his readers not to dispute long genealogies and false myths. This is a direct reference to the Book of Enoch, which has a long genealogy of all the angels until you get down to Satan, who is then blamed for all the evil in the world. What they're attempting is to blame turmoil, death, and evil in the universe on angelic sin rather than human sin, which the Bible explicitly attributes to humanity. Genesis 3 explains how sin entered the earth. How did we exist in a world plagued by turmoil, death, evil, sin, selfishness, and various forms of corruption? That happened because God made a promise with the first humans, and they broke it. They were erratic, dishonest, and unfaithful. They cheated on God in the relationship, and they rebelled against Him. So when Jude quotes and refers to this material, he is demonstrating that sin exists in the world because of human rebellion, not angelic wrongdoing. And that brings today's video to a close. We truly hope you had a good time watching the film. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.